I hope all of you have had some good conversations, lots of good information, a chance for a lot of different things to think about and process over these next, hopefully at least few days, if not a little bit longer. And we have one more keynote that we'd like to get to. Before we do that, just a few quick announcements. If you've lost some jewelry, I have some items that have been found, so please come up afterwards and let me know. Also, please be sure to do your evaluation forms that are in the folder, and as you leave, there will be some of our student volunteers at the various doors that will both take your evaluation forms and have the CEU certificates for you. So please make sure they're very important. We do read them and compile them and make changes and adjustments and based on what you've said. Also for your name tags, we do reuse the holders. So if you can, before you leave them on your tables where you're seated or on the way out at the table there. But the easiest is to kind of remember now and just put them on the table, and that way you can take your name out if you want to save your name, but we need the plastic. Okay, I think that's all of my information. I would now like to read a little about our closing speaker today, Percy Brown Jr., and we'll introduce him in a minute. So Percy Brown Jr. is the Director of Equity and Student Achievement for the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District. He's an adjunct instructor at Edgewood College and Senior Outreach Specialist for the LEAD Center at the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. His work primarily focuses on transforming educational systems and educators to effectively meet the needs of underrepresented populations in public schools. He has developed and implemented professional development courses that engage educators to self-reflect in their beliefs and values in relationships to race, biases, microaggressions, stereotype threat, and systemic oppression. Welcome to Dr. Brown. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Jenny, but I would have to at least let everybody know that I'm not quite a doctor yet. I am in the process of writing my dissertation. And let me tell you, you know, you write, you send your work in to the advisor, and then they send it back to you, and when you have more red ink than what you've actually written, I tell you sometimes that can be deflating. It's a process, but one well worth the journey. But good afternoon, esteemed social workers, social work students here at UW-Madison, to all of the community-based folks that are out there doing good work, and just participants who have been able to take advantage of this opportunity to engage in conversations about racial injustice. I'd like to thank you for being here this afternoon. I'd also like to thank Dr. Robert, who is the director of the Social Work School, the School of Social Work here at UW-Madison, and to all of the staff who have taken the time and worked hard to put together such a wonderful conference. And I was here 2 years ago when it was in a different building, and I did a keynote address midway through the day, and there were about 200 people in attendance, but I was talking to one of the planners today, and she told me that there were 385 people registered this year and that it actually filled in less than 48 hours. So I am just amazed to see the progression and the increased involvement of people in this community who are willing to engage in these difficult conversations. So kudos to the 385 people that are here for taking the time to sign up for this, and they actually had a waiting list. So that speaks to where people are in this community, and it is encouraging because we are living in very, very difficult times. And as you can see, the title of my address is The Complexities of Race in the 21st Century. My talking points for today are as follows. I'll talk about a racial incident that went viral in the Middleton community last week. I'll talk about other racial incidents that have taken place in Middleton and across the city. I will reflect with you all on a Facebook video that I put out in response to the situation that happened in Middleton. But then I'll also get into the history and culture of racism in Madison, looking at racism at the national level from President Nixon to Trump. And then I'll leave you with some questions and things that you can do, and hopefully I'll have enough time for you all to ask some questions of me. Typically, I do not like to use PowerPoints because I am a man of God, and oftentimes I'd allow the Spirit to kind of lead my conversation. And if you're familiar with pastors in the black church, when we catch that spirit and get going, we go totally off script and we can be long-winded. So I had to do this to keep myself controlled and contained because I am definitely a civil rights activist, and I've dedicated my life and do believe that God has willed me to have this purpose, to take on this fight, especially here in Madison, Wisconsin, because I am a native of Wisconsin and I've been part of this community for over 40 years. So I'll go ahead and get started and talk about what happened in Middleton High School last week. There was a basketball game, girls' basketball game that took place where the girls from Madison East came into Middleton High to take on the girls of Middleton. And the Middleton High School basketball program is undefeated. They're ranked #1 in the state, but Madison East has a very, very talented team and a very talented coach. And don't tell anybody if you see him that I said this, but James Adams, who is the girls' coach, is actually a good friend of mine, and we've battled on the basketball court and we've coached together. And oftentimes I like to criticize him on his coaching skills, but he is a phenomenal coach. So Madison East goes into Middleton and beats them by 11 points. And mind you, and I don't know if I said this, the girls' basketball team at Madison East, they consist of all students of color, and the coaching staff is all black. Middleton, the girls' program, is all white. When the game was over, one of the Middleton players posted on Snapchat a post, and if you can see right here, I just took a couple of phrases out of it, and it said, "Be aggressive, not violent, and hashtag you're gonna work for us anyways." Yes, a teenager from Madison, Wisconsin, or Middleton. Uh-oh, technology will get you sometimes, right? I was bothered by the statement. It has a lot of underlying meanings when you think about be aggressive, not violent. That reinforces the stereotype that black people are inherently violent. And I have such issue with that comment because this goes all the way back to 1915 when the movie Birth of a Nation came out, and that is when America started demonizing blacks as violent and as criminal. And here we are today in 2017, and we're seeing high school students post such language. And what bothers me the most is this stereotype has been placed on black people for over 100 years. But if you know anything about the black experience, violence has been inflicted on our community by the white community for over 398 years. The system of slavery was violent. Even after slavery, we had the era of Jim Crow. In between the late 1880s and 1940s, there were 3,959 lynchings of blacks on record committed by the white community. And that was only on record. Over the last few years, we've seen the ongoing killings of unarmed black men by local law enforcement agencies. And the violence is still being inflicted on us, but when we talk about Chicago and the violence that's taking place, which is self-inflicted, all we hear is black on black crime, but we don't talk about internalized oppression, which is when a group of people have been beat down for so long that they start inflicting that pain on each other. The second post, you're going to work for us anyways. That statement can take us back to the period of enslavement of black people. It talks about the power dynamic of racism, or even just this concept of race. We are so misinformed when we talk about race. We always look at race from the context of biology. But there's research out there now that says that there are no biological differences between you and I because of difference in melanin in our skin. But if we take a real look at history, at our American history, this whole idea and concept of race is nothing more than a socioeconomic racial caste system that has subjugated blacks and have kept blacks oppressed for 398 years. We are 2 years away from 400 years of systemic oppression, and to see what is happening in our country today is really ticking me off to no end, and I am truly at my rope's end. And to see that type of post happen in my backyard, surprisingly enough, was not the first time that I've seen that this year. And I responded to what happened, to the Snapchat post on Facebook, and I spoke specifically to the black community. And I asked the black community to remove the girl from the statement and to analyze the statement and to look at it from the context of it being true when we look at statistics and data here in Madison, Wisconsin, Dane County, and the state of Wisconsin. I put that video out while I was still in a high state of emotional distress, but I was really crying out to my community because I am at a place where enough is enough. And the video caused stirred very healthy debate on Facebook within the black community. Some people understood where I was coming from, but some people were able to critically analyze my statements and found the harm in some of my message that was being inflicted on the black community. And I did not want that to happen. And initially, as the constructive criticism was coming, I was trying to defend my point. And it just really went way out there. I mean, it got so nasty that some folks really started calling me out of my name. I was called an Uncle Tom. I received some emails where people were saying, "Take down Mr. Brown." I even received an email in the subject line that said hate mail, and on the email it called me a racist. And I was like, damn. I'm like, if they call me a racist, I'm like, I don't know where we are as a community if I'm racist. But I took those hits because as I reflected and as I prayed and as I talked to those close to me, I understood where the constructive criticism was coming from. Because for one, by me asking the black community to remove this girl from the statement could be perceived as me letting the girl off the hook and not holding her accountable. The other piece to that is by me asking the black community to remove the girl from the statement was perceived as me placing the blame on the black girls from East and not on the girl. And the third piece was my video took this incident to levels which really overshadowed the hard work of Coach Adams and the girls from the Madison East basketball team, because to be able to go into Middleton and beat an undefeated #1 team in the state is a tremendous accomplishment. And that one statement that that girl made in my video really overshadowed all of that. And I had to re-enter Facebook in a place of being humble and having some level of humility and apologizing to the black community for those very things. And also apologizing to the black community because it caused a divide. And we are at a point in time in our society where the black community can no longer be divided. So I had to go back on Facebook and I apologize for those things. But I want to emphasize the point that they were really coming at me on with this piece of black people being the blame for the conditions that they've been in, or for me making that comment to remove the girl from the video. The black community had every right to be mad at me if that's how they perceived my messaging, especially coming from someone who was responsible for being the voice of the community. Because there have been too many things that have happened in this community where the black community or the black person has been blamed. Tony Robinson was killed by a white police officer, but we all know that the blame was placed on Tony for losing his life. And there were a lot of people in the community who felt that way because as I read articles from the Cap Times, I also paid attention to the comments. And there were so many people from this community that justified the actions of Tony being killed and to a degree said that he deserved it. The same thing happened with Janelle Laird when she was beaten and tased by a police officer at East Town Mall not too long ago. And yes, she was also blamed for what was inflicted on her. Not only did I see that in the comments from the article from the Cap Times, but the only reason why her charges were dropped is because she had to take ownership for that whole situation and had to apologize to the police officers for beating her and tasing her. Even the racial disparities that exist in this community, especially when we look at educational outcomes, graduation rates, and so forth. I've worked in the Madison School District for several years, and I've worked in Middleton, and I've heard the narrative so many times that the reason why we have the outcomes and data that we have for black kids is because the parents don't care, or that the community is not involved, or that they're coming from Chicago and those are inadequate environments and educational systems that they're coming from. But we never take the time to think about the culture and climate of this city in which we live. There's been so much that's been going on in Middleton this year, and a lot of it has to do with the national climate, but what is happening in Middleton is also happening in the Madison School District. It's happening within the city of Madison, statewide, and also nationally. This incident that I've just described on Snapchat is not the first time. I've had to deal with athletes in my high school, white athletes, who have called black players nigger from opposing high schools while on the field of competition. I'm dealing with the fact that there's a young black male that I've worked with for several years who has never gotten in trouble, who was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and was in a situation and is now facing up to 80 years for 2 charges of sexual assault of a white girl. I don't know all the facts of the case, but I know initially in terms of how the high school was responding, and I had to hear from people that are allies in this fight that people in my district, despite all of the great work that we're doing to try to deal with the systemic racism and the individual racism and biases that exist, were talking about this situation and calling the accused perpetrator and calling the one who was the victim. But how can we call that young man the perpetrator when he has not been convicted of this crime? If anything, you say alleged perpetrator and not perpetrator. So if you're not mindful of the language that you use, as in this situation, this young man has already been found guilty. He's experiencing a disenfranchised experience his senior year at Middleton High School. I'm also dealing with the fact that some teachers wanted to do a unit on the new movie Hidden Figures that has come out. And they want to take a group of students, an entire class, an entire grade to go see this movie, and they've got a series of lessons the following day to engage in our learners in issues of the isms. There are a lot of layers to this, but I'm only going to give you a snapshot of what really happened. I got wind of the curriculum for that day, and the focus of the curriculum that they will be teaching all of those kids that are going to see the movie, it was focused on gender discrimination and the lack of women in STEM. You see the problem with that, right? I saw the movie, and there were probably 2 situations where gender discrimination came up. And it was when Kevin Costner was acknowledging the work of all of those in that unit, and he addressed them as men and did not acknowledge the black woman that was in the room. And the other instance was when Taraji was flirting or courting the black soldier, and the black soldier was like, wow, I'm actually surprised that they let women do this kind of a job. And Taraji checked them. So those were the only 2 instances that I recall of gender discrimination or really thinking about the lack of women in STEM. The focus of that movie was really about the racial discrimination that those women had experienced. Taraji had to run a half a mile to use the bathroom and come back. And when she was locked into her work, she picked up her coffee mug and walked to the table and poured coffee from the coffee container, and everybody looked at her crazy because they were like, how dare you pour the white coffee and drink the white coffee? So the next day, there's a black coffee container there, or a colored only. And to me, as an educator, that is such a huge disservice, not only to the black kids, but also the white kids, because you've taken an opportunity and you've whitewashed it, and you've erased it. And these are just few examples of what happens in public education. But we're dealing with what's happening on this campus. What happened at the football game where a white guy has a costume on with President Obama having a noose wrapped around his neck with 90,000 fans, and nobody has a clue to how derogatory and disrespectful that is, not only to the highest office in this land, but also to the black community. And the response was lackluster, and they tried to follow up and make that right. We've got a white student on this campus who's trying to start an alt-right group, but has also been found guilty of bombing or burning 2 black churches. Even our chief of police, when the Janelle Laird situation happened, I see the headlines of the newspaper, and it has him quoted as, she should have surrendered her liberties. Surrendered her liberties. Now, I don't know Chief Koval, and it's not my place to judge him in terms of who he is and where he is on his journey. But for me, that comment right there was a reflection of the institution of slavery, because black people had to surrender their liberties. And this is the climate and culture of the city that we live in, and it's masked under the illusion of being liberal, progressive, forward-thinking, and being inclusive. You guys are seeing my frustration slide. So that's where I'm at today. My frustration is at such a high level, and I'm so deeply embedded in this work that I am fearful for what's coming, not only for the black community, but the greater good of Madison, the state of Wisconsin, and the health of this nation. So I made my mistakes on that video, but I'm glad that you are here to be able to hear what had happened, and I have to put that out there. So feel free to go back on the Facebook and watch that video. And I'm going to put her on blast, and I hope she doesn't mind this, but Corinda Rainey Moore, who is someone that I truly and deeply respect, was someone who was critical of my video, but I have to commend her for being critical and challenging me, because she was right. And one thing that we can all learn from this lesson, which I have learned, is that we have to be able to put ourselves in places of vulnerability, but when we're wrong, we own it. We stay humble, accept that humility, own it, because that's the only way that we can grow and move forward. So Corinda, I thank you for challenging me on Facebook about my message. So as you can see, hell yeah, I am frustrated, because there's enough going on currently in our community that should really challenge our thinking and force the conversation in a different kind of way. But we've got to understand the context of what we're dealing with in this community. This community wasn't always, and I don't think is, liberal, progressive, forward-thinking, and inclusive. If you really go back and look at the history of Madison, you would know that there was a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan that existed in Madison in the 1920s. And there were members that held very high offices in the city of Madison. If you go back and look at some of the pictures of the history of Madison, there used to be huge Ku Klux Klan rallies that took place that filled all of State Street and the Capitol Square. The Nakoma community, which is an affluent and well-to-do community that has been in Madison since the 1920s. When that community was being developed, the Nakoma Realtors Association put into its covenants that there will be no niggers allowed in the Nakoma community. Niggers were not allowed to buy or build in Nakoma. But that was also the federal law when you go back and look at the 1940s and 50s with the Federal Housing Authority, when they issued out about $1.2 billion of low interest rate loans for whites to be able to build homes, which was the boom of the middle class in suburbs. But even for blacks that went and fought in World War II and put their lives on the line and had access to the GI Bill, could not access that low interest rate home loan from the federal government and buy homes in the suburbs because of redlining. I talked about the racial incidents that are on the rise in Madison. I don't have to talk about the data, because all you have to do is read the Race to Equity report. I've met with Mayor Soglin when Tony Robinson got killed. We've had community meetings. And I was so frustrated when a few months ago, Mayor Soglin said that the Race to Equity report was not true. I'm so sick and tired of this denial that this city lives in. And even for the data, I don't even have to talk about the data. I don't need it because I've lived it. Being born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin, growing up right on the south side of Madison, coming through the Madison School District and seeing the majority of my black friends being tracked into special education, being called LD, seeing what happened with the war on drugs and how the black community here in Madison was rocked. I'm talking about good brothers that were not violent. They were just victim of systemic oppression, and that was the only alternative that was placed out there in terms of entrepreneurship for black people. And what do you expect a young black man to do when he's 14 years old and he's handed a product where he can pay $150, and if he cuts it up, chops it up, and puts it out there on the street and sell it, within 2 hours, he's profited $300. So now he's got $450 in his pocket. So if he keeps that cycle going, by the end of the week, he may have made $2,000 or $3,000. Now he has the ability to buy better food, buy clothes for his siblings, help out in the house. Yes, everybody has a choice, right? But we have to think about, where did the cocaine come from? I don't know any black people who own airplanes who were flying into Latin America and coming back and dropping it off in Chicago and in the south side of Madison. And one of my close friends in the early 80s was the first and biggest drug dealer of cocaine in Madison. And he confided with me years later and said that he was getting his cocaine from a white lawyer in Madison. But how many white lawyers were being sought after and convicted for pushing cocaine? We went after the street dealers. Now, just back to public schools as far as my frustration. In our schools, racial comments that are derogatory can be traumatizing for the student of color experiencing the encounter. There's a book called But I Don't See Color by Adam Alvarez, Richard Milner, and Lori DeLeo O'Connor. It's a research-based book. And here are some examples of how traumatizing events takes place in schools. Experiencing daily racial harassment from peers, teachers, creates fear and stress. Not having a student's own race and experiences validated over time can be disheartening. And some races in the curriculum are absent or portrayed as negative or unimportant. I see this playing out day in and day out in the District of Middleton, but it's not exclusive to Middleton. This is a national epidemic, and it really runs rampant right here in our own backyard in all of our local school districts. But we have to understand that our teachers can only go on what they've learned. And all that we've ever learned has been from the dominant culture perspective. The black experience, the Latino experience has always been erased or omitted and replaced with propaganda to paint this picture of blacks as being less than, as dangerous or violent, and even the same with other peoples of color. But this is where we have to start and begin our work. So these are some of the dynamics that are playing out locally. But I'm going to shift gears right now and get into the national scope and what has happened the last 50 years. And I think I've actually skipped a slide. Actually, I haven't. I'm sorry. Hopefully this will work and you'll be able to hear the video. But I'm going to go to Dr. King, because I know every third Monday in January we have huge celebrations honoring the legacy of Dr. King. We have something at the Capitol Rotunda at noon. We have this huge celebration at the Overture Center, and there are activities that take place throughout the weekend to honor the legacy of the late MLK.
I must confess that
But I want you to pay attention to this video, because we always think about King the Dreamer. We always think about King from Montgomery bus boycott, and we think about the King from Selma and the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But I want you to listen to a clip of Dr. King from 1967, which was 50 years ago.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and that we are involved in a war on Asian soil, which, if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation. I'm not going to say that all of our problems will be solved if the war in Vietnam is ended, but I do say that the war makes it infinitely more difficult to deal with these problems. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective, and programs of social uplift suffer. This is just a fact of history, so that we do face many more difficulties as a result of the war. It's much more difficult to really arouse a conscience during a time of war. There is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. It strengthens the forces of reaction, and it brings into being bitterness and hatred and violence. I think the biggest problem now is that we got our gains over the last 12 years at bargain rate, so to speak. It didn't cost the nation anything. In fact, it helped the economic side of the nation to integrate lunch counters and public accommodations. It didn't cost the nation anything to get the right to vote established. And now we are confronting issues that cannot be solved without costing the nation billions of dollars. Now, I think this is where we're getting our greatest resistance. They may put it on many other things, but we can't get rid of slums and poverty without it costing the nation something. I feel that nonviolence is really the only way that we can follow, because violence is just so self-defeating. A riot ends up creating many more problems for the Negro community than it solves. You can, through violence, burn down a building, but you can't establish justice. You can murder a murderer, but you can't murder through violence. You can murder a hater, but you can't murder hate. And what we are trying to get rid of is hate and injustice and all of these other things that continue the long night of man's inhumanity to man.
I don't know if you all have known that about Dr. King. So why do we always work from his speech in 1963? Why are we not examining the fact that maybe even today, the dream that he talked about is still a living nightmare for black people? Dr. King also, in the last 2 years of his life, had several conversations with Harry Belafonte. And he admitted to Harry Belafonte that he may have made a mistake on integration. Before he was murdered, he believed that to walk black people now into integration was like walking black people into a burning house. And he said that because the nation was not ready to truly deal with what authentic integration would look like. Dr. King in that interview also talked about the fact that it didn't cost the nation anything to pass voting rights, to allow blacks to be able to sit in the front of the bus or to sit at lunch counters. But when has this country ever acknowledged the economic side of what has been happening in the black community? And acknowledging the fact that our country, our state, and our localities have not put forth any economic investment into the upliftment and betterment of the black community. And whenever the black community talks about it, all we get back is that narrative, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. You're not working hard enough. But I would push back on that question and ask, when have blacks ever been given boots or straps? The government has always helped the community out. I talked about the Federal Housing Authority. When the country was expanding westward, millions of acres of land was given away to whites to farm, but was that given to blacks? So yes, we are definitely starting from way behind. And yes, we don't have to go all the way back to slavery to see how decisions from the 50s, the 60s, and 70s have ongoing generational impact that's plaguing our community today. Let's talk about the Nixon administration. When he ran for president, he ran on crime, law and order. He said he was going to be a law and order president. The Reagan administration came back with the same rhetoric and said that he was going to be a law and order president. He also launched the war on drugs. The Clinton administration actually put the systems in place to incarcerate thousands of black and brown bodies as a result of the war on drugs. And here we are today, supposing to be a country of freedom, yet we have more people locked up in prison than any other country in the world. Black people make up 6% of the nation's population, but makes up 40% of the prison population. And most of the blacks that have been incarcerated have been convicted of non-violent crimes. And now we have the Trump administration, who is all about law and order. But we have to understand what those things really mean, and we have to dissect the meaning of that. Because we're paralyzed as a community, we're paralyzed as a state, and we're paralyzed as a nation. Why? At the individual level, we've got implicit bias. What is implicit bias? The attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. How does that play out? I'll give you some terms. Whites on welfare. When we think about that, we think, oh, they're poor. Blacks on welfare. When we think about that, oh, black people are lazy. Whites torch cop cars and destroy property after basketball games. The whites are considered rowdy. Blacks torch cop cars and destroy property after a cop gets away with murder. Blacks are called savages. White boys being physically aggressive with one another on the playground is often perceived as boys will be boys. But when black boys being physically aggressive with one another on the playground, the perception is that they're violent. And we saw that even from the Snapchat post, because that young woman felt that Madison East won because they were being aggressive, and she saw that aggressiveness as being violent. White people in corporate positions of power is always perceived as hard work. But if it's a black person in a position of power at the corporate level, oh, they got it because of affirmative action. So those are the implicit biases at play. But let's talk about the systems for a minute. And it was President Nixon and his administration that came up with the Southern Strategy in the late 60s and early 70s. And the Southern Strategy is methods that the Republican Party used to gain political support in the South by appealing to the racism against blacks harbored by Southern white voters. But I'm just here to tell you that the Southern Strategy is not specific to the South, but also lives in the North. And one of Nixon's advisors, John Ehrlichman, was quoted with this: "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." This is a Nixon advisor, and we also have the FBI that was working to undermine the civil rights movement and blacks who were fighting for equal rights. And it was J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO program, or the Counterintelligence Program. It started before the 50s, but the focus prior to that was on communism. But as the civil rights movement began to take shape, the women's rights movement, the Latino rights movement, and the Native American movement, J. Edgar Hoover shifted his focus towards those movements and even deemed Martin Luther King Jr. as public enemy number one. But today, we want to paint this picture of King as being a beloved individual during that time period. But that was not the case. Even the Reagan era, Lee Atwater, who was a campaign strategist to Ronald Reagan, talked about the Southern Strategy even in the 80s. He said, you started out in 1954 by saying, nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you. It backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things that you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. Even if you don't believe in the Southern strategy, let's look at the suburban strategy. Instead of using overt resistance to racial integration, the method is de facto segregation in the suburbs. And de facto segregation is voluntary segregation. And if you think about the conditions and how we're situated as far as housing in Madison, we are products of de facto segregation. Blacks do not necessarily live with whites unless you're one of the few blacks that have gotten through that cracked door of opportunity. We have so many poor pockets of poverty that our people of color live in. And the thing that's so crazy about it is that they're situated in places where if you're not driving off the beat, you won't even know that they exist. And that's why it's so hard sometimes for us to fathom the fact that we actually have poor communities of color. So we've got to think about that. And what are we willing to do to change that? But for me, these three things right here, and there's so much more, there's so many layers to this. But these are three things for sure that I know are paralyzing this community. Dr. King, in his last year of life, talked about the three evils of society. He talked about racism, he talked about militarism, and he talked about materialism. It's quite evident that racism is still a cancer, not only in our community, but in our nation. When we think about militarism, with the Clinton era, he has militarized our police departments. We've got police departments with tanks. We've got police departments with helicopters, military-issued guns. And let's not just talk about what our military is doing right now. What's different today than what was happening in King's era with the Vietnam War? We've been in the Middle East now for almost 15 years. 15 years. And do you know how much the federal government is spending on that war? 54% of the pie. 54% of tax dollars are going towards military. But the narrative is we're not spending enough on military, and it's all about protecting our freedoms. But what we spend, the next 8 countries underneath us in terms of military spending, does not even come close to what we spend. But the narrative is the federal government is spending too much money on Medicaid, Medicare, health care, public schools, welfare, blaming the poor. When we're a country that probably could care less about the poor and is more war-driven. So what's the difference between what was taking place in Vietnam financially than what is taking place today? We're not losing that many lives like we did in Vietnam, but our spending focus has not changed. And King talked about that. The money that we're spending on war takes away from programs of social uplift. It takes away from being able to rebuild infrastructure, and those things impacts the work that you do because you're in the social work business. You're in the public sector. You are charged in your career with uplifting the community, but our government would rather spend more money on war than support the hard work that you're doing and supporting the hard work that educators are doing. So fundamentally, there's something wrong. And we can't continue to sit back and allow our government to do what it's doing. At some point, we've got to stand up and challenge how we're spending the money, which is our money. Even in 2008 with the bailout, who got the money? And who got in trouble? The doggone borrowers did. I had close friends who were victim of this Ponzi scheme, and they ended up being convicted and having to go to jail because mortgage brokers misled them. But Wall Street and the bankers get the bailout, and the CEOs are walking away with $500 and $600 million. But we sit back silent. Materialism is simply nothing more than economic exploitation through consumerism. And we're all guilty of that. I've been brainwashed. I still buy retro Air Jordans. Lord have mercy. When I was in high, I wanted to be like Mike. And when I was in high school, a pair of Air Jordans cost $100. I was working at Arby's, making $3.35 an hour, so I knew if I worked 33 hours, that would give me that $100 check to buy those Air Jordans. Now they're like over 200. But we have to question these three evils of society that MLK talked about if we really want to be champions for justice. Before I get into these questions that I have for Greater Madison, I want to get on Trump for a minute. But I want you all to understand that these issues of racial injustice and oppression, it's not owned by the Democrats or the Republicans. This is not a political party issue. This is the issue of the American soul. The Democrats don't own it, and the Republicans don't own it. But I want to put you on notice, and this is also part of the reason why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. So Trump, if you go onto the whitehouse.gov website, he has a tab that talks about the issues and what he's going to do about it. He's got a tab saying, making our military strong again. And this is what he says. I'm just taking a few lines. Our military needs every asset at its disposal to defend America. President Trump will end the defense sequester and submit a new budget to Congress outlining a plan to rebuild our military. So if we're spending 54% of taxpayers' dollars on military, how much more do they want to increase the budget? And if he does that, where do you think they're going to pull that money from? What other parts of the pie do you think are going to shrink? It is going to be the programs that are dealing with taking care of our elderly, making sure that our folks have adequate health care, but ultimately it's going to negatively impact anything that the systems have been designed to do to support poor people and people of color. He also has a tab that says standing up for our law enforcement community. He says the Trump administration will be a law and order administration. Wow. Sounds like Nixon, sounds like Reagan, sounds like Clinton. Yes, Democrats are guilty, because let's not forget, Hillary was calling black folks super predators. And that's one reason why I was like, wow, we really, I was stuck in a position as a black man to say, well, who do I vote for? Because it was a, who's the lesser of two evils? Or was there a lesser of two evils? Because Clinton was responsible, and all we get is a damn apology. And he apologized for slavery. But what about the economic remedies that King talked about that the black community probably needs to help get ourselves out of the conditions that we're in? Trump also said the dangerous anti-police atmosphere in America is wrong, and that his administration will end it. He also says, our job is not to make life more comfortable for the rioter, the looter, or the violent disruptor. And I wonder who he's talking about there. Black Lives Matter protesters, women's rights protesters, and 3 million people, women got away with it the other day. But what's going to happen once he really gets himself set in and is able to pass some of these policies and reallocate resources to make sure that any resistance is shut down by our government, even though we're a government and a country founded on protesting? He also said that he's committed to building a border wall to stop illegal immigration, to stop the gangs and the violence, and to stop the drugs from pouring into our communities. And supporting law enforcement also means deporting illegal aliens with violent criminal records who have remained within our borders. This is the rhetoric that's being used on the website for the person who holds the highest office in this land. And for me, I am very concerned and afraid. Oh, darn it, I am over. I'm so sorry. But I'm about to close right here, and I wish I would have gone a little bit quicker so that I could have left an opportunity for questions and answers. But I have some questions for you, and then I'm going to leave some things that you can take with you to kind of help you on your journey. Why are poor communities of color in Madison located in areas that are food deserts and far from healthcare facilities? Why did the city redevelop Verona Road and close off the Allied Drive neighborhood? Why do black students have to walk into schools daily and cope with microaggressions and open up textbooks that have erased who they are or what they have contributed to the world? How many agencies in this community have black people that possess hiring authority and a directive to ensure that staffing is diverse? What monetary efforts outside of philanthropy dollars for programs are taking place to invest in rebuilding impoverished communities of color in the Madison area? And I want you to know that the city's looking at spending $163 million to build a new jail. But why can't that money be shifted on the question that I'm asking right now? Why are we not talking about the history of Madison, its chapter of the Ku Klux Klan and the huge Klan rallies that occurred on State Street in the Capitol Square? And why are we not talking about the Nakoma community and its history of excluding blacks from being able to build and buy? And the reason why I raise these questions of why Madison is afraid to own that racism is embedded in its history, and looking at current day statistics and incidents, we have to own and say it continues today. But here are some things that you can do to combat the racism that exists in this community. Become aware of your own racial biases, implicit and explicit. Take the Harvard Implicit Associations test. They have several different ones, but take the one on race so that you can do a self-analysis of where you are with your racial biases, if you have any. We do this with staff, and there have actually been white people that have come back that are actually more biased towards white people than black people. So it'll be interesting to see where you all fall, but don't be afraid to take that. Reflect on the level of race-based conversations that you have in your personal and professional life. And as you reflect on that, reflect on how you've responded when someone says something implicitly or explicitly racist. Develop a critical racial lens to see the world differently in your personal and professional life. Educate yourself. Find areas of activism and resistance to engage in. Question your daily surroundings. Remember what Dr. Roberts said when she was like, do not be a bystander, because that's part of the problem here too. We've got white folks that are all down for the fight, and they are fighting. But then you have those who could care less. But then you have the ones in the middle who may learn a little bit and may think, oh my God, it's too big, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to take my privilege and choose to just stand on the sideline. But to be complicit like that means that you're just as guilty as the resistors. Because we're entering a time now where things are going to get very ugly, not only for the black community, but also for working class people, for people that are in the public service sector. And at some point we have to figure out, are we willing and courageous to take that stand? We've got to work to bring women, Latinos, blacks, the gay and lesbian community, and other marginalized groups together to form a common agenda for social change and then fight for it. Like, truly fight for it. We've got to become aware of the next wave of increased policing and advocate for resources to be allocated towards community policing that is grounded in prevention and best practice. And the reason why I put that out there is because I'm paying attention to Trump. I know Trump is about to allocate federal dollars to local law enforcement agencies. But we have an opportunity to shut that down and sit down with our police department and our mayor and say, instead of hiring more police officers, let's use these resources to really take a look at what community policing could look like. Let's reallocate some of those resources to say, instead of hiring police officers, let's hire people in the community and start building the bridge with this gap that we have. It doesn't have to all go towards that, but we have to be creative and think outside of the box and hold the systems accountable, because the money's going to come from the government. And if we have $163 million to build a new jail, you can't tell me that we don't have millions of dollars to invest in uplifting poor communities of color and even our poor white community, because it is an issue of economics. But for black people and Latino people, race has been the reason why economic degradation has taken place. And then the last piece, and I'm afraid to go there, but I think we have to go there. If the House of Integration is really on fire, and in working in public education and seeing the trauma that kids of color go through, we've got to consider alternative options to provide quality education to black students and brown students. Colleen Kayer came years ago and pushed Madison Prep, and it wasn't to say that the Madison School District can't do better by black and brown kids, but he was introducing a model and an opportunity to do something different and outside of the box. And if it works for black and brown students, now we have a model. We have something that actually works, where we can take that model and figure out how to embed it in the systems of the Madison Metropolitan School District and the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District and all the other surrounding districts. But when we think about what Governor Walker has done, he's expanded the statewide voucher program. Donald Trump wants to invest billions of dollars in school choice. So why not have the city consider supporting a school with a pedagogy that is centered around the lived experiences, history, and culture of our marginalized population? Because our systems have been failing for decades now. I've been here for 40-something years, and I've seen it. And it is now time for us to start thinking outside of the box. But we have to have a new courage, we have to have a new will, and we have to confront the reality of our culture and city, and we've got to decide. For those who are willing to fight, we have to figure out a way to unite. For those who are going to resist, show your ugly damn face. If you feel that way, show yourself. Because I can appreciate and respect you more if you show who you really are. Because then I will know how to navigate your behind. And that's just the difference between the North and the South. I spent a lot of time in Mississippi, and at least in Mississippi, they've confronted racism. White folks who are racist, they'll let you know that they're racist. White folks who are not racist, they're going to get down and roll with black folks. But we've got to confront that. And for the bystanders, you know, I already put that charge out to you. If you continue to stay on the sideline, which there were several during the civil rights movement, then that's just going to make our work that much harder. But I am encouraged today because this particular conference right here has doubled in number in 2 years. So I see allies. I see people that I've already worked with, and I have nothing but tremendous respect for the field of social work. So I hope that you've taken this message and it will leave you thinking about some things, but I also hope that it will leave you charged up to fight the good fight. And the more that we can create opportunities like this to have the conversations, this is steps to building. But we've got to take the conversations further. We've got to move to action. We've got to unify under a common agenda to deal with all of the social ills that are plaguing our community and nation, because this country was founded for we, the people. And we've got to believe in we, the people. Obama talked about there shouldn't be a black America, a white America, a brown America, but one America. We're not that America just yet. But if there is a place that can be the shining light and the game changer, why wouldn't it be Madison, Wisconsin? So if we want to hold true to being inclusive, liberal, progressive, and forward-thinking, let's roll our sleeves up. Let's work together. Let's break these silos. Let's stand in resistance and protest, but let's stand together as a community, regardless of our differences, and take on that fight to do what's best for our community and this nation. Thank you very much for your time, and I apologize for going over my time.